In this video, we are going to build a React Tooltip component. So tooltips are used to display some information when you maybe click over an icon or a button, or maybe hover over an icon or a button. You can display tooltip in order to tell the users what the icon does before the user actually clicks on it. Okay, so to give you a quick example of this, I have a simple web page that I'm building here, and if you look at these three icons on top, there's a YouTube icon, GitHub icon, LinkedIn icon, and you can see that as soon as I hover over one of these icons, you see that this small box that appears, that's the tooltip that says Full Stack Pro on YouTube. If I hover over GitHub, you see another tooltip component, Prashant on GitHub. If I hover over LinkedIn, you see that Prashant on LinkedIn. So this tooltip component are used to tell the people that is using a site about what an icon does when the button does not have any text, or when the icon does not have any text. The users can hover over and then get that information from tooltip. Okay, and this tooltip component integrates well with our theming system that we have already built. So if I switch to light theme here and hover over that again, you see that the tooltip, the styles of the tooltip adjust by itself based on the theme. Okay, and there are a few new concepts that we will talk about when we are talking about tooltip. So this basically, when you see this tooltip, you see that box, there are basically two components that we'll be writing in order to make this tooltip component happen. The first component is the tooltip component itself. So that's basically the entire box that you see in that content, in that tooltip content. And the next component that you see there is the tooltip content component itself. Okay, so that tooltip component is used for whether to display or hide the tooltip and provide some background styles, whereas the tooltip content component is actually used to display the content of the tooltip, in this case, which is Full Stack Pro on YouTube, and in other case, that is Prashant on GitHub. That's the tooltip content. The anything background that you see, the open state is open state. That is all content within the tooltip component. Okay, so in order to do this, there are a few new React concepts that we have not talked about in this playlist that is super easy to understand. Let's first try to understand a simple use state hook from React. Okay, you should already know this hook. I don't think we have used this use state hook up until now in this phase of playlist, but this hook is super easy to understand. Go to React documentation, search for use state, and it says that use state is a React hook that lets you add a state variable to your component. Okay, so in order to understand this in the simplest way, before we understand something called context, let's try to understand what use state does. The simple use case for a use state hook is to keep track of a state within the component. Okay, mark that word there, within the component. By using use state, we can only keep track of the state of the component within that component only. Okay, we cannot use that state outside of that component. So that's all what use state does. But when we talk about context, React context, whenever we use this create context, we can define a state. Okay, we can define a context, and then we can write some states there, and that state can be used globally. And by that, I mean that state can be used outside of the component you are defining that state to. Okay, so we'll understand this when we actually start writing the component, but that is the very basics of the context hook. Okay, and you can also think of React context somewhat similar to Redux, even though Redux is more powerful, it's more big. Context is, you can think of context as a utility that can be quickly used in order to manage state outside of the component. But when you talk about Redux is a global state management system. So what I usually like to do is I use context because context is built within React. So whenever I'm developing or building components and I want to keep track of those components, either I use state, but a lot of times as you'll see in this tooltip component, we cannot use state because when I hover over this icon and button there, the isOpen state is set to true, and that isOpen state is used by the tooltip content component and not the main tooltip component. So the isOpen state will be shared between the tooltip component and the tooltip content component also. Okay, so that's why we will use context, and we'll also use state, but we will mainly use context. This is the primary idea of this component, and there are many other components that we'll be writing using context, where we will need to access the state outside of the component. Because React components, the props can be passed only from parent to children. Props cannot be passed up from children to the parent. So in that case, that's also where the context hook can be very useful. Okay, so let's go back to VS Code here, and I have everything cleaned up here. Let's come to packages, let's come to core, src, components, and let's create a new folder here called tooltip. Okay, or you know what, before creating tooltip component, let's actually go and create that context. Okay, let's actually understand the use of context. So what we can do here is, in the core folder inside src, let's go ahead and create a new folder called context folder. So this is where we will store all the context for the tooltip, for snack bar, for drawer component, for drop down component. We'll store all our context within this context folder. Okay, so the first context that we will write is a tooltip context. So let's create a new folder again here called tooltip context. Okay, and inside this tooltip context folder, let's create a new file called tooltip context.tsx. Okay, so let's start writing this context. It's super simple. Okay, so if you go to the documentation here, this is how you create a context using create context, and then you supply some value, which is also known as the state. Okay, so this default value will be replaced by isOpenState. This create context comes from React, and this is just some constant that is declared in order to use the create context. Okay, so as you can see in this example, in this reference, they are importing create context, they are defining a theme context, and they are putting a value which is light. So this can be, if they are talking about theme, then they are basically talking about what this state is at, whether it's a light theme or dark theme. Okay, so let's go and write this here. So in tooltip context, what we'll first do is import create context from React. And let's define a TypeScript interface called tooltip context props. And this, the only thing that we need to keep track here is the isOpenState. Okay, because this is the isOpenState is the state that'll be used by the tooltip component, and that'll also be used by the component that renders that tooltip content. Okay, so you'll see this in just a bit, but let's just follow on for now. So isOpen, so this will determine whether the tooltip is open or not. Okay, and the tooltip is open whenever the user hovers over a component. Okay, so is open, this will be a Boolean value, either true or false, and this is also optional by this question mark, because we can supply a default is open state. Okay, so that, and now let's define a tooltip context is equals to, let's use that create context from React, and let's pass in the types. So that is tooltip context props, and we'll set is open to false. Okay, by default the is open state will be false, because we do not want the tooltip appearing even when the user is the pointer is outside of that icon. Okay, we only want the is open state to be true when the user actually hovers over one of these icons here. Okay, or not one of these icons. This tooltip component can be used with any icons. Basically, even with these fields it can be used, but it's generally used for the icons where there is no text. Okay, so that's that. Let's just simply default export this tooltip context, and let's save this file. So that's all for the context. Simply all we did was import a create context, define a TypeScript interface, and then define a tooltip context where we set the isOpen state to false, and we export this tooltip context. Okay, so now let's come to let me collapse that. Let's come to components, and now let's create a new file called tooltip. And inside this, we'll create two new files. First one will be tooltip.tsx. Okay, and let's also create a test file called tooltip.spec.ts. Or you know what, let's not create that right now. Let's only work on this tooltip component because we're not writing test yet. So again, just like before, I'm going to simply copy and paste here instead of typing in all this. So import React, use straightforward ref from React, is styled from style components with system props from mods.js dash YouTube. Okay, let me not forget that because that has caused me a lot of problems in the past. And we will finally import that tooltip context from context, tooltip context, tooltip context. Okay, so let's define a TypeScript interface called mod tooltip props extends. This extends from react.html attributes, and we can just call this a simple HTML element. So the types for this tooltip component is, the first one is the children, because the tooltip component itself will contain the tooltip content component. Okay, and you'll see why we are dividing this tooltip and tooltip content separately instead of merging them into a single component. We'll talk about that in just a bit when we come to that part. But you might think that, well, why not create just one component tooltip, and then this tooltip content here, the actual content, can also be within the tooltip content, and that is for customization. We want to be our library to be as flexible, as customizable as possible. So that's the reason of doing that. So let's keep writing this here. Children will be React node. Let's not forget ref, react.ref HTML element, and the other thing that we'll need to, the other type is I'm going to call it EL, which also stands for element. So this will also be React node. So this EL, this is a React node, the EL, and this element is the element that you want to show the tooltip to. So the element here in this case is this icon, or a icon button component, okay, that renders YouTube. Here this element is this icon button component that has that GitHub icon within it. Okay, so that's this element that the user can supply. Okay, what element that they want to apply the tooltip to. And let's also do arrow, because right now this tooltip here does not have arrow. Usually it would be nice to have arrow on top of it pointing to that YouTube icon. Same over here, it would be nice to have arrow on top of the tooltip itself that points to the GitHub icon. Okay, so let's do the arrow too. And the arrow can be boolean. Whether the user wants to show the arrow or not, they can switch between true and false. Okay, so I'm not going to write all this here because I do not remember the syntax for this no matter what. So let's do forward props. We do not want the arrow and element to be sent to the DOM. We talked about this so many times previously in the past, and we wrote completely from scratch. Okay, from now on I'm not going to do that because we talked about this enough already, why we should not be forwarding this invalid HTML attributes such as EL and arrow to the DOM. Okay, so we defined a tooltip that renders an HTML div, and we are setting the position to be relative. Okay, so let's also do the same thing for mod tooltip arrow, and this arrow will use a span HTML element. The types for this would be mod tooltip props, and for the styles I'm just going to copy and paste here for the styles. Okay, because I'm not going to sit here and write CSS. This is not a CSS course, but this mod tooltip arrow, we'll see an arrow on top of the tooltip, okay, and we are applying a before pseudo element that has the content position of absolute, and it also has the border color of props.theme.tooltip.bz. I think we defined this already in our theme, so let's go back to theme, because we might not have, or we might have defined this tooltip.bz under theme. So that's under utils, src, assets, dark theme. Is it there? Tooltip.bz, we already have that, so which is good. Okay, we can close that, and then let's write a actual tooltip component. Const tooltip is equals to return. So this will return let's not do the return first. Let's actually destructure the props there. So children and element, arrow, and any other props that the user wants to supply here, okay? And this will need to supply the types, where the types are located for this tooltip. So that is the mod tooltip props as defined above. And let's also not forget about ref. We did talk about ref in early videos of this playlist, okay? So HTML element, and let's define a state here. So this is where we are going to use the use state, okay? So const is open and set is open equals to use state. The default state is false. So you might be wondering, well, why are we using I just stated that we are going to use context in order to manage the state, but why are we using the use state inside the tooltip component? You might be wondering, I said completely different. Well, it's not that. What happens is we will need to define use state inside the tooltip component, and you can see that tooltip context has a state called isOpenState, which is initially set to false, and you see that we also defined a isOpenState and set isOpenState inside this tooltip component. Now this isOpenState can only be used within this tooltip component, okay? But since we are using context, what we can do is from the tooltip component, we can set this isOpenState, or we can set this isOpenState using set isOpen, and whenever we set that, the main context, the global context isOpen, is going to be switched to either true or false, okay? So that's why we'll need to do this here. So it's really as simple as that. So let's also do write a function handle mouse enter. So this is basically used to determine if the user is hovering over the element, okay, or the icon. So we're going to set is open to true. Let's also write another function called handle mouse leave. So this is when the user hovers out of the icon, okay? Set is open, simply set it to false. And before we return anything, let's also now destruct the value, and this is open. Now this is from context, okay? Const value is equals to is open. This is from the actual context here, okay, from the tooltip context. Now you'll see that we can use the tooltip context.provider. I don't think we imported the tooltip context, so we'll have to import that too. Value is equals to, we'll just supply it to this destructured value on top here, okay? So, or did that import it by itself? Tooltip context, we did already, so that's good. So now let's, inside of this, we'll render mod tooltip, and inside of this mod tooltip component, we'll supply some defaults. First, let's not forget props. That's any props that the user wants to supply. Let's not also forget ref, because we are doing that in every single component. This tooltip component has these properties: ref, element, and arrow. Or, well, we already did ref and children, but we need to deal with element and arrow too, okay? So what we can do is, we can assign the arrow to default to true. If the user supplies the arrow value, arrow to true, then we'll set it to true. If the user does not supply anything, the default will be false here. Okay, we're not going to show arrow. In my use case, you can change this, of course. And since we have the handle mouse enter and handle mouse leave function defined, we'll use on mouse enter and set that, or call that handle mouse enter function as defined above. Same with on mouse leave. These are all by JavaScript. Okay, this on mouse enter, on mouse leave, these are JavaScript events. Okay, these are different from React. Handle mouse leave. And let's also supply a data test for this in order to write our test using Cypress. Data test is equals to, I'm gonna set that to tooltip. And inside this tooltip component, we will write element. We'll first render an element, and if the tooltip is open, like now we are using this useOpen state, if the tooltip is open and arrow, and so if the tooltip is open and the arrow is set to display or set to true, the user can set the arrow to true, we will do mod tooltip arrow like we defined above. We will also write a data test. We'll call that data test ID for now. Usually you must have recognized my naming convention here. I usually write data test for the main component, and if there are other components used within that component, I usually call it data test ID. Okay, because two components cannot have the same attribute data test. We will need to write a different data dash any word that you basically want to write here. Okay, so this is valid here, but let's leave it to data test ID, and this will be tooltip arrow here. Okay, let's close that, and element, and it'll also take children, so let's render children there, and let's save that, and let's finally export this. Export default tooltip. Let's never forget to wrap this with system props and also forward ref. Let's save that. So that's the tooltip component. Before writing test for this, let's also write a tooltip content component. And how I have done this until now, I think I might be doing some restructuring in the future, but I'm going to create a new folder here called tooltip in the components, in the components root folder. Okay, tooltip content. Because the tooltip and tooltip content are related, it would but this tooltip already will have a couple files, so that's why I like to make that separation of different components in different folders, because this tooltip component, because to use this tooltip content component, you do not really have to use tooltip component. Okay, but that would not make any sense, but it can still be done, so that's why I like to separate that there. Okay, tooltip content dot tsx. So this tooltip content component, let's again import everything that we need. React useContext for ref style components with system props from mod.js YouTube/utils. Let's also import box that we wrote this component. I think the video is titled under React Foundational Components. We wrote this box component. Okay, so if you have not watched that, go and watch that video. It's called React Foundational Components. I forgot what part it was in, but you'll find that video in this playlist. Okay, where we define this box component. Same with tooltip context, we already have that. So let's define a TypeScript interface called mod tooltip content props. This will take children, and the children will be React node. So basically the text or anything that the user wants to render inside this tooltip content. Okay, but usually text. Let's also do ref react.ref HTML element is open will be boolean, and display position where we want the tooltip to be displayed. So currently this tooltip by default I think displays to the left, this is really the left position, not really bottom. But for now, let's just specify two position. Let's call it right and left. Right and left. This, if you look at it, the tooltip seems to be displaying on the bottom, but this is because I think probably because of the spacing issues here, that's why it's displaying to the bottom, but it's just displayed to the right or left. Okay, but you can, again, simple CSS. Okay, nothing much going on here. You can add more features. Okay, until now I have only written this what I need for my use case, so that's why, but it should be fairly simple if we go and do it. I'm just going to copy, and because these are really simple things here, I do not want to write all that down. So after the defining the interface, same with forward props, mod tooltip content, this is where we write styles for the tooltip content. Okay, the position need to be absolute, overflow is hidden. And the height, you'll see that this height is what determines the the isOpen state. So props.isOpen, this is where we are using the isOpen state, and this isOpen state will not be defined within this tooltip content. This isOpen state will be using from the tooltip context. Okay, you'll see it in just a bit. Everything I think is pretty straightforward there. We have two display position right and left, and specify the left and right property there. So that's that, and then let's finally define the tooltip content component. And let's destructure children, display position, and I think those are the only two that we have here, children and display position, and any other props that the user wants to supply here. Okay, and mod tooltip content props, let's specify types for those. And since we will use isOpen in this, well, let's not forget the ref here. Okay, because that can cause a lot of problem if that ref is missing, and if you want to manipulate the if the user wants to manipulate the component themselves, and if they cannot use ref, we are in big trouble here. Okay, so let's do that, and then let's close. I hate it when this happens. Ref react.ref HTML element, is that comma not needed there? Yes. So now let's use that isOpen from the context, from the tooltip context. Okay, isOpen, we'll use useContext from React. Okay, this useContext hook comes from React. Create context and useContext, those are the two new ones in newer version of React, which you are using all newer version. Tooltip context, and then there should be an equals to there. So now mod tooltip content, and then inside this we will render a box component that we already have. If you do not have this, go to GitHub, clone my repository, go watch those videos, copy and paste the code, or just write the code, whatever you want to do. Okay, but this box component is needed here. Or if you do not want to do that, you can also do div, but you won't be able to apply that padding, so you'll have to find other ways to do it. So you could basically do instant, because that box component simply just renders a plain div, but that box component is also provided with the with system props hired a component like this one, so we can directly write some code, features provided by that with system props. Okay, but I'm going to use box, and since we are writing all the components by ourselves, it doesn't look good when we use those plain HTML tags in the middle of the code here. Okay, so children, and that's that. Let's apply the default values for these props. Always do .. props, spread that, do ref isOpen is assigned to isOpen, and display position is equals to, if the user supplies the display position, then we will use that user supplied display position. If not, we will do I will do the default display position of left. Okay, and let's also write a data test for this. Data dash test is equals to tooltip dash content. And I believe we'll need to export this. So export default as always with system props forward ref and then the component. Okay, tooltip. Okay, so that's the tooltip context, tooltip, and tooltip content. So let's now write a test for this. Okay, so the test for, it's again fairly simple test. We have not come to complex testing yet, but let's create a new file. Let's write a test for tooltip first. So tooltip.spec.tsx. And over here, these are simple tests here. Okay, I think we wrote test. I wrote them completely from scratch manually in the, I don't know what part it was, but in my previous videos I did that. I'm not going to do that here. Okay, because writing all these tests, I think these are 500 lines of code here, and I do not really want to be sitting here and not 500, about 200 lines of code. I do not want to be sitting here and writing 200 lines of code here. Okay, for testing, especially since we already know the testing concepts here. Okay, so only when there is new concept in testing, then I'm going to write test from scratch. If I think that it's a simple test that we are writing, then I'm just going to copy and paste from the code that I already have here. Okay, but if you want me to explain something in greater detail, let me know down in the comments below and I will do that. Okay, because I don't know what people know and I do not know what people don't know. Okay, so what we're going to do here is, let's describe a tooltip render that looks good. Let's close all this and let's close that context and let's close the describe block too. Okay, and it's a render default tooltip component with arrows. So let's go and render that tooltip. Always make sure that you provide that you supply, that you wrap everything with the mod theme provider, because that's where the theming comes from. And of course, it looks like there's an error. Let me undo that. We'll need to mount the tooltip component and also tooltip content. See, there's an overlap when we are writing test for the tooltip component and tooltip content component, but I think it's a better thing to separate these components. So this is how the user will basically use this, right? They will right there, they will import mod theme provider, they'll provide their own theme, not the mod theme, and they will write the layout. Inside the layout they'll write tooltip. So the user can completely get rid of this tooltip content too, right? They don't need to use that, but if they don't use that, they are not going to be able to provide the styles for the tooltip content. Okay, so let's run Cypress here and then we'll talk about this a little more. So in order to run our test, we have that in main root package script. Okay, never forget, we have such a, I'm so glad that we have this structure here, project structure. We can run everything from the root. Okay, all we need to do is keep doing this, and then you do not have to look at the scripts here. Okay, what to run. So npm run test, we are running core here. Okay, the core package that will open up Cypress. Let me close that. End-to-end testing, I did configure that, but it's not, that's not what we are doing here. Component testing inside this. So we have we're working with tooltip component. So tooltip, and this is writing this save icon here. That's well, that doesn't matter, the copy icon. Tooltip, this should work. Okay, let me, okay, that is working. Yeah, because what with Cypress, I think it's a bug that whenever, I don't know if you have experienced this, but I do this, I do all the time. Okay, what happens is as soon as you open up Cypress, then it's like when you click on something, it doesn't seem to be working, and then you have to click it twice, and then you do not, if I click this twice, it's just going to close it. But Cypress does that sometimes, and then it automatically fixes it. So I don't know why that happens, but with Cypress, that is one issue that I've noticed. But you can see that if I hover over this icon here, you see that the copy to clipboard tooltip is being displayed. Okay, and do not worry about the placement of this tooltip content. You see that the tooltip content is being displayed so far out than the actual icon, but this is totally normal because this is this web page here. This is but when you use this in real apps, so like in the app, this is going to work. Okay, so I don't know why Cypress does this. Maybe it's we have to not the I'm sure it's not about the viewport, but this tooltip will work. Okay, so the default position I think is to the left, so the tooltip will be displayed to the left. Okay, and you can see that the arrow is set to true. Is the arrow being displayed? Yeah, it was being displayed. And the element is the button, and this is copy icon. We can set this to anything like success icon, which you'll see that the success icon and the tooltip content can be changed here. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, why create two components, tooltip and tooltip content? Well, the reasoning behind this is when the user uses the tooltip, wants to display the tooltip, they can first write the tooltip, and then with tooltip content they can specify display position. And because this tooltip content props or the component is wrapped with the with system props hierarchy component, they can directly supply the padding value. So if they want to supply padding is 50, like if they without hard coding it, this is not hard coding it, this is inline styles, very simple. Okay, very easy to write. So you see that the padding of the tooltip is now 50. So that's one of the reason that why I like to separate these components, even though they seem like they are related, and they are related, but I like to separate this. And one drawback for doing this is because inside tooltip everything could be written inside the tooltip component, right? We did not really need this tooltip content. We can merge this with tooltip, but that's what happens if the user, let's say that if they want to increase the padding on the content on the tooltip content or on the tooltip, the padding only has to be applied to that particular component, to either just tooltip or tooltip content. Okay, it should not be applied to the entire tooltip. That will be hard to manage. Okay, but the one drawback is since this tooltip content it renders a div, we are rendering an additional div of in the DOM. Okay, so that can be, if we do this a lot, that can be a performance issue because you are adding unnecessary node to the DOM. But I think for this it's not a major performance, it does not impact performance as much. But I think I just like to, well, I like to stick to the structures here where I have separation of components. Okay, so that they are extremely customizable. So that is the component render. Let's check for this. No, we don't need to do much here. All we are doing is trying to see if the component exists and tooltip arrow components should exist too. Okay, so this test of course we do not really need to write this first test because we will test this whether they exist or not in every single test cases here. Okay, so let's write another test case. So the first one was it's a display tooltip content with arrow. The second one is without arrow. Okay, so display render tooltip component without arrow. Let's save this. Arrow is set to false, so it should not display an arrow. I don't need to run only that test because this test will run in the end. So the first test is has arrow, so render tooltip component without arrow. If I hover over that, you see that the tooltip component does not have an arrow there. Okay, so that looks good. The other test for this tooltip and tooltip component that I see is the test about the with system props, the global props, and the actual props, which you have written so many times. So okay, so we're going to wrap this tooltip component here just a bit. Let me just copy and paste this. Go look at this GitHub source code. Okay, because all this test here, we wrote this so many times in the previous videos. Okay, in the beginning videos where we did foundational components, and I showed you why we need to write this global and custom styles test, and also why we'll need to do props. Okay, I'm just going to for the other components too, because this particular test, this context props and this context global and custom styles, will be writing this to context in every single component. Okay, and I explained this in previous videos, so go and watch that. But Let's save that, and then let's make sure that everything is running. There's no any errors. So all the test cases are running, which is good. So now let's move on to writing the test for the tooltip content here also. Okay, so tooltip content, let's create a new file, tooltip content.spake.tsx. okay, and this does not do really anything special, so I'm going to copy and paste that, just like with the, let me correct that there, YouTube. I should come with a better name for this, but Mozilla YouTube, that looks good. So that's the tooltip content. Okay, the test is we're just rendering it, trying to check if it has the CSS, and the tooltip component on the right, we're trying to check if that right or left value is applied, and this value here. So one thing I wanted to mention is, so left is, we specify left in percentage here. So I think, where is left? Left is 15%, but this 15% is dependent on the user's screen size, right? So initially in Cypress, we have set this viewport, this entire white background there. I think we have set it to 900 by 700. So this 15% is 15% of that 900 by 700. Okay, so that's why when we write the actual test, because in our test cases we have set the viewport, the Cypress's viewport, and we'll need to calculate the 15% of our current viewport. Okay, in this case 15% of the viewport is 108. I think yours viewport and my viewport is the same, so you should not have any problem, but you can find this code on GitHub here. Okay, and on the background I'm going to write comments, make things look a little pretty here, but I don't think I should do that in the video, because you seeing me writing comments, I think that's looks a little stupid of me. So making or writing sitting there and writing comments in the code that anybody can do. So I'm going to do that in the background before I actually before that this library goes to production here. Okay, so I think that's, let's check this tooltip content also before I wrap this up. Tooltip content, refresh the page, everything is looking good here. Okay, all the test cases pass, and the padding is also, the styles is also being applied, the hardcoded, the custom styles from the user. Okay, so I think that should be it. I will see you in the next one. See ya.